Hello everyone, I welcome you all to the module 29th of the course of UN SDGs. In this module, we are going to cover these four summits, conferences which have happened over a period of time. The first one, Rio Earth Summit 1992, Kyoto Protocol 1995, Paris Agreement 2015, and COP27 in 2022. So let's begin with the first unit, Rio Earth Summit 1992. The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, also known as the Rio Conference or the Earth Summit, there are multiple names used for this conference, was a major United Nations conference held in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil from June 3rd to 14th in year 1992. Well, so these are the major, focus areas, for this conference and major outcomes also. Agenda 21, Rio Declaration, which came out of, this conference. Forest Principles, CBD, UNFCCC, UNCCD, okay, and this is the logo. So, Rio Earth Summit. Climate change, desertification and biodiversity loss are heavily interlinked and pose existential challenges to humanity. In response to these challenges, governments founded three sister Rio Conventions at the 1992 Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. These are the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC, also known as UN Climate Change. The second, the Convention on Biological Diversity, CBD, also known as UN Biodiversity. The third point, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. Okay, so as you have understood, this conference, this Rio Earth Summit actually gave birth, to these three things. These three things actually came, from this summit, and which took up actually lead in continuing the a message of this summit for a longer period of time. And even now, like we are aware, we are we have seen several conferences and meetings and summits and reports coming out on the subject of climate change, and UNFCCC is actually leading that torchlight, okay, at global level. The three Rio Conventions are the result of concerns over similar environmental and development issues and have sustainable development at their hearts. Well, at that time, if you realize, well, this year we are talking about was a 1992, okay, a long time from today, right? So at this time, there were some hard focused areas for which this whole thing was actually founded. So if you see, the majority of this concentration was on the climate change as a global phenomena, and then issues related to biodiversity, okay, the loss of biodiversity, the preservation of biodiversity, the concerns around biodiversity and multiple things, right? And then the third point was about overall combating desertification and preventing soil from going bad. So soil usually if it is not cared for, if it is left unattended, right, so there may be a chance that it can grow into a forest, or there may be a chance, if it is not properly handled, it can grow into a desert also, right? So leaving no humus, no moisture and no vegetation in the soil, killing everything and going almost dead, right? So that kind of a desert is not good for agriculture. It's not good for hosting forest, but very few animals and other flora and fauna can survive in a desert, right? So compared to a forest, where you see the life in its full a potential, a desert is kind of a place well there is life, but kind of you can call it as life very very short of like life, right? And it is not good because it doesn't produces anything. It eats up a lot of things, right? So preventing soil from going in a desert format, okay, and maintaining those forests, that was the premise. On these three things were became the major outcomes of Rio Earth Summit. The Rio Conventions work closely together with the overlaps in their work becoming ever stronger as the challenges related to climate change, desertification and biodiversity loss grow and cross-cutting solutions are developed. So key definitions over here of, if you see, for the like these three, climate change refers to long-term shift in temperatures and weather patterns that in the long run risk completely altering the ecosystems that support life on earth. Okay, so climate change, like we all know, like as a phenomena what it is, and it encompasses like a huge number of variables inside it. Okay, there are several agents, like like a stakeholder, there are several nodal points and there is like interrelationship at the cusp of it. We are seeing like that imbalance which is happening in the prevailing climatic pattern of this planet in a long time. Okay, and this change is getting like absorbed in a very kind of like a frequent like in intervals, and its recurrence is happening more and more. Okay, bringing in abrupt like a changing in that like a pattern, like the climatic pattern which has been existing on this planet for a long time, right? So that abrupt like a change, we know it as like a climate change, right? Biodiversity, it covers the totality of the world's animals, plants and ecosystems and their whole like interrelationship between them, like how they are positioned, how they are related to each other, how they are helping each other. Even if you see like one species like is feeding on another species, but that's the way actually nature is, right? And it actually like helps them also in multiple ways. So you may have seen documentaries on famous like these Discovery or NGC channels, right? Or even like like books and literature, like how like a food chain. So even the predators also help like the like animals from the lower like levels to grow in multiple ways, right? So that biodiversity is essential for the maintaining like all of them. Okay, if you end up killing all the predators, okay, all the lower animals are also going to die. So there's so much interdependent. Even if we see them like eating, but that's not actually is the actually like a threat to the like existence of the lower like species. Third point, desertification. It refers both to the literal expansion of deserts and gradual decline in quality of soil, vegetation, water resources or wildlife. Okay, so maybe it can happen at a very faster rate or maybe at a slower like a pace, but a change in the quality of soil which makes it bad leads towards like a desertification or maybe like a increased salinity or increased maybe acidification. So both are not good. A balance is actually like essential to maintain like the like a proper like a level of nutrients, proper like a life in the like a topsoil, right? And of course the soil is a kind of a sustainer of all sorts of vegetation, okay, and retaining moisture, right? So it is very essential for like the planet. So the question arises here: what is a UN convention and what is it like like a doing, right? So we will see. A UN convention is a binding agreement between different countries. Under such conventions, nations adopt key goals at annual conferences of the parties, COPs, like COP, like we keep hearing, like a COP27, was concluded in year 2022 in the month of November, right? So this COP stands for Conferences of the Parties, and parties are those nations which are like a member of like a UN convention, and report periodically on progress in implementing these goals. Each Rio Convention has a supporting secretariat. A key task of the secretariat is to organize annual COPs, which are attended by national delegations and numerous participants of observer organizations, including from business and civil society. Other key tasks are to help governments report data and to organize technical workshops. So now you know what UN convention is, right? So UN convention actually hosts like these conferences of the parties, right? COPs every year, and the countries, the organizations, the independent research agencies, other scientists, civil society members, people from industry and businesses, right, or any person who may be interested through some genuine channel can participate like in these conferences and can listen to what others are saying and can speak also about their own observation, okay, and findings. So it works in a very scientific and technical way with the support of like several independent organizations such as maybe IPCC you may have heard of. Okay, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It's an again a kind of international organization which is constituted by like a different multiple a lot of participating countries, right, and scientists and engineers and like, people from all walks of life, right, and together they actually study like this phenomena of climate change and its extent, like how much like changes it is bringing in one place and all of those effects, those impacts of climate change also, right. So this puts up like a comprehensive actually documentation where you can see like a these changes happening in the terms of data, in the numbers, right. You can see like how many people got affected for so and so region, and how many people got displaced for so and so region, how many places fire actually like a natural like a fires actually have occurred, floods have happened, how much of extent of desertification has like happened in the last maybe 1 decade, 2 decade, and so on. So these are some examples. So this is where all of these things actually take place. That's why UN Convention is an like an integral part of like a doing like a such things and carrying out like these exercises such as climate change studies or even implementing UN SDGs, etc., etc. Coordinated solutions. Given that land and marine ecosystems absorb more than half of man-made carbon emissions, it is clear that protecting these systems need to be a central component of climate action. At the same time, healthy biodiversity and healthy soils play a huge role in building resilience to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. The biggest overlap in the work of all three Rio Conventions is in the field of nature-based solutions. Such solutions refer, for example, to the protection of coral reefs and mangrove forests that protect coastal communities from storms, flooding, and erosion. Measures to avoid cutting down huge swaths of tropical forest are beneficial both for animal and plant life and are crucial for a stable climate, food, and drinking water. So you see, like like some example over here, like like damages to the coral reefs or like a mangrove forest. Like usually coral reefs are like underwater in the oceans, right? Maybe those shallow like a marshy areas where there is a little depth of water, but it harbors like a huge like a species of like aquatic animals. Okay, so if this is this like a water level, okay, so just a depth of like a few meters, maybe at some places 1 meter, some places 5-10 meters, 20 meters. So in this range actually these coral reefs actually like a work, and these corals actually you may have seen like their pictures, they actually harbor, they provide shelter to like a number of like aquatic species, right. So which it becomes like you can say underwater like a forest, where there are a lot of like species of like aquatic animals. And then about mangrove forest. So mangrove forest also come like where like there is like a shoreline, right. So if this is the seashore, okay, if this is the like a sea waves, right, and if this part is the land area, right. So mangroves actually like happen to like exist like right at this like a place at this juncture where there is like a saline water merging with the soil, right. So up to like a certain extent and into in this deeper inside, okay, they actually like grow, and they help oceans, and they help saving like a soil erosion. Plus they also harbor like a number of aquatic animals, birds, and several other species, like even you may have heard of Bengal tiger, right. So in the Sundarbans, okay, so Sundarban is an area where there is a huge swath of like these mangrove forests, and including like a big animals such as like a wild buffaloes, right, and some like elephants, and elephants not particularly in this area, but in the like harder like a surface areas. But yes, Bengal tiger like lives in this like a forest, right, where there is like a regular like a catchment of like a tide, low tide and high tide, right. So in the recent like decades and last like 1 or 2 centuries, with the advent of industrialization, there is a huge like damages like happening to such like a forest, right, and coral reefs and normal forests also on the like a land, right, and that is causing the concern, because 1 or 2 places was okay, but now that extent of damage is getting into very high like quantum, and bringing a lot of damages, like direct damages which are one can like observe and see clearly, like coastal communities, from storms. So now there are these storms are like directly like hitting the like land and those settlements where like people used to live for centuries, right? Because of the loss of like these like a mangrove forest, plus loss of coral reefs is now kind of like damaging all of those like species which used to live in these places. Okay, and now they are simply getting like killed, right? So the loss of like their species is also becoming one problem, plus flooding and erosion and multiple other like regions. So these climate change catastrophes are not so like unknown now. Okay, so multiple places, multiple types of catastrophes in some like a extent, or like this thing, right? Land degradation is not only extremely harmful for biodiversity but accounts for around 60% of global methane emissions. Okay, so land degradation, you may not have observed like the direct impacts, but there are several direct and indirect like impacts of like such like things. Methane is a powerful greenhouse gas that is related through various unsustainable agricultural practices, including meat production. Sustainable agriculture and land use is also a shared area of work of all three conventions, as is recognized in the Coronavia joint work on agriculture. Another key overlap includes the recognition that societies need to rapidly introduce and scale up the use of clean and sustainable technologies. This applies notably to renewable energy technologies such as wind and solar power. These are key to reducing greenhouse gas emissions whilst diminishing pressure on land and forest biodiversity by providing alternatives to unsustainable and polluting biomass fuels, right? Like charcoal, earlier it used for like cooking and all, right? So you see, like there are like a lot of impacts of like such things. One of this you got to know, like including meat production. So meat is a very kind of like a high energy, water, and all sorts of resource consuming like a product. Plus it has a lot of impacts also like a post like a consumption also. So in the like in all of these like a food categories of food items, this comes as one of the like a high energy consuming and sort of like the worst one, and it is advisable to avoid for so and so regions. Because like this extent of like its damages are such a like is increasing in volume, that now it is being said by such like agencies like United Nations and many more, that like a meat production must be actually reduced, right, for saving the planet. So such is the extent of like damages like coming out of like this particular item, right? And like we saw over here, like how like a biomass fuels, like if you see conventional like fuels, this is why like LPG and like these like alternate like cooking mediums were actually introduced several decades back. And these were kind of gradually like phased out, like a coal based or charcoal based like a cooking, because it produces a lot of like smoke and like a particulate matter and things. Plus it is irrecoverable, right? And once it is lost for forever, right? So you cannot make like a coal, because coal, natural coal, you may have heard, you may have read like how many like millions of years it takes for the like a bio based like things like trees and like their logs etc. to convert into this kind of like a form, like often like a coal, right? So that is not possible for us to do in a shorter period of time. Plus it has a lot of impact, very high impact compared to like these like alternative like solutions. Plus the best is to use like a clean energy like a solutions, like a solar power or wind farm, etc., right? Minus like that battery, the energy storage like a component which still has like a high quotient. Okay, keeping that aside, actually like if we are able to like a crack like this fully clean like energy sources, that would be the best, with almost like nil impact on the planet. Yeah, so the Rio Conventions and the SD, Sustainable Development. Each convention contributes to the goals of Agenda 21 adopted by the governments in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. Agenda 21 has the central objective goal of achieving global sustainable development. This was the prime target. in the 21st century, with sustainability defined by the 1987 United Nations Brundtland Commission. Remember that like a EAC aspects of that definition, where reserving like resources for tomorrow's generation was also underlined. Yeah, as fulfilling the needs of current generations without compromising the needs of future generations, whilst ensuring a balance between economic growth, environmental care, and social well-being. Right. So those the ESC aspects of sustainability actually came from this. Plus, it actually highlighted like a need for preserving like resources for future generations also. Otherwise, if this generation is able to exhaust all of it, okay, what are the like a new generation people they are going to consume of, and how they are going to meet their own needs? So that will be a very like a weird situation, right? So, but unfortunately, the world is leading like still into like that direction at a much faster rate, which needs to be like brought down. So this is the like a picture from that time when this summit was held in Brazil. You can see the dignitaries from different like countries participating. Well, this is not like exhaustive complete picture of all the members, okay, but a few. So how the Rio Conventions formally work together? Numerous articles and decisions agreed and taken at the annual COPs of each convention highlight the need for increased collaboration between them in order to improve synergies and reduce the duplication of activities. In August 2001, the conventions established a joint liaison group as an informal forum for exchanging information, exploring opportunities for synergistic activities, and increasing coordination. Options for collaboration have been explored in several meetings and documents, and a number of collaborative activities are already underway. Such activities are, for example, the joint coordination of the work of scientists working on key reports relating to climate change, biodiversity, and desertification, along with joint workshops on overlapping issues such as preventing deforestation and restoring drylands. Finally, a Rio Conventions pavilion installed at major international meetings also plays an important role in convening discussions aimed to build coordinated approaches and partnerships towards these interrelated goals of the Rio Conventions. So, if you see Rio Conventions, these Earth summits have happened, taken like a place multiple times at multiple times different places, right? And in Rio itself, it has happened thrice or even more, right? So these conventions, if you see over the years, what do they do is actually they are also gradually growing as the this whole phenomena is expanding. We are able to discern its impacts and the scope in which it is now hampering the planet's balances, okay. And so in the same ratio, actually these conventions are actually also evolving to include more and more subject areas, topics, and regions for controlling that impact, right? But yes, there is a coordinated effort to grow in a gradual a sequential a format. You can see Earth summits, different times and different places. So the first was in Earth Summit 1992 at Rio de Janeiro, UNCD. Second Earth Summit happened in year 2002 in Johannesburg, South Africa. It was called World Summit on Sustainable Development, WSST. Third one, Earth Summit 2012. It again happened in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was called UN Conference on Sustainable Development, UNCSD. Well, important outcomes we have seen earlier. The first outcome of Earth Summit 1992 was this Rio Declaration. It contained 27 principles that were supposed to guide countries in future sustainable development. Okay, so 27 principles. We will see these principles in a short while. Agenda 21. It is an action plan concerning sustainable development, but it is non-binding. Okay. The third, forest principles. It is formally called non-legally binding authoritative statement of principles for a global consensus on the management, conservation, and sustainable development of all types of forests. It makes many recommendations for conservation and sustainable development forestry and is non-binding. Well, this non-binding is the one factor which like doesn't puts like this as a mandatory like article on the countries, and many of them have been like evading for a while. Well, conventions open for signatures: UNCBD, Conventions on Biological Diversity; UNFCCC, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change; UNCCD, United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Well, there are a few alternate names of Rio Earth Summit 1992. We know it as UN Conference on Environment and Development, UNCD. Earth Summit, of course, 1992. Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit also we call it, and sometimes just Rio Conference also.